And while we're waiting to get started, just reminding folks here in the building, appreciate Joe and Ryan for signing up to be program hosts and help get the place set up and close the building down. But we still need someone to cover next week and week 4. So if you'd like to help out, just let me know afterward. You can just come up. It's really easy. It's a nice way to give back, is to know how to be a program host. And also we have Maggie, who's been our tech person, so really appreciative of their willingness to do that. I'm sure the people online really appreciate all that, and so many other people who get the talks up on the YouTube channel and up on Dharma Seed for people to listen to. So in a moment, we'll be chanting the Buddha's 5 subjects for frequent recollection, or the 5 remembrances. So people who are getting a sheet, why don't you hold on to it for the future weeks, or even better, memorize. It's nice to be able to do it just on your own at home without having to rely on the sheet. It doesn't take long, actually, to memorize something like this. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. I am of the nature to sicken. I have not gone beyond sickness. I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. I am the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, by my karma. Whatever karma I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. Thus we should frequently recollect. So we'll settle into our sitting time. And as we all know, we emphasize this receptivity. And it really depends on this radical trusting that it's okay to feel what we're feeling. It's okay to be open and exposed to the way it is now. The moment isn't asking for any control or to fix something or to get somewhere. And in this way, we're learning to let the moment, the conditions, we're letting them reveal themselves. We're not looking for any particular kind of experience. Just let the moment, conditions, the way it is, let it reveal the way it is, the underlying nature. And it's really a relief not to have to fix or not to have to get somewhere or become somebody. And let's take some time and practice receiving the experience of breathing. And as probably all of you know, it's not easy to simply receive the breathing process as a natural process. Many of us have this habit that what we're attending to, that I have to manage, I have to control. But just let the body breathe as best you can and notice what that's like, observing the breathing process, feeling it as sensation in the body. And in this receptive way, simply comprehending or discerning the nature of the process of breathing and the nature of other phenomena, other thoughts and sounds and sights and other experiences that come and go. And we'll begin to sense a basic truth of the flow, the movement of experiencing. which is it's always coming into being. Something, one moment after another, always coming into being. But before an experience really becomes the way it is, it's always something else coming into being. So in that sense, it's subtle, but in that sense, our experience never becomes a thing. It's really this process of becoming, this process of coming into being. But again, it's not so much about looking for that subtle underlying nature. It's more about trusting the moment to reveal itself, just learning what it means to be open and how we can use something ordinary like the breathing process as a way of stabilizing and building trust in that being open and receptive. And it's important to value relaxation in order to be receptive, in order to be open. We become curious about any holding, any tightness, just curious if it's needed. It may or may not be able to release. We don't want to be relying on being tight. We want to give a chance for the moment to reveal itself. So if there is some tightness in the body, in the mind, anywhere, then we observe that, we receive that as well. We let that tightness reveal its underlying nature, the way it is, without expectations, without wanting it to go away. What is the nature of this experience? In order to really sense the way things are, it's more about learning how to trust this receptive, open, curious, kind quality of the heart. Nature, the way it is, it will reveal itself. The practice, so much of the practice is getting out of the way, which is this training that we've undertaken to be open, to be wisely present in this open and receptive way. It takes a lot of trust, a lot of courage. Everything's moving. Our thoughts about this and that, including thoughts about our practice, come and go. Perhaps some emotions are arising and passing, sensations, of course, sounds, sights. And you might, as the mind becomes more stable, more spacious, you might notice different lifetimes. I mean that in a really simple way, like the mind gets entangled, and in a sense it takes birth with the drama of that particular entanglement, thinking about work or thinking about this or that. And then eventually that little drama, that lifetime passes away, and then we take birth as a sincere Dharma practitioner, exploring what it means to be open and receptive, keeping the present moment in mind. And then that lifetime passes away and we take birth in another way. The one who's bored, perhaps. But the real practice is just observing these different births and deaths. Different ways the mind gets identified, takes experience personally. Just observe that process. Never really ends. And we're learning to see it with wisdom instead of to see it with identification. So we're learning to experience the moment as an unfolding or continuous becoming, not so much as a thing. And just see if you can keep that changing nature, the becoming nature, if you can keep that in mind even as you're being present, that it's unfolding, that it's changing. And to do this, we really have to be willing to let nature be nature, which includes the nature of our own conditioned mind. Even the nature of you as the practitioner is unfolding. And we allow it all. And noticing all the change as you begin to stretch and move your body. Thanks everyone for being here. Before I forget, I'll just take care of a little business. I want to make sure everybody did get the email today. And if you didn't get the email from me, that means you're not registered, I guess. So you can still register or just reach out to the center and we'll make sure you get on the email list. So a little later tonight, the last 15 or 20 minutes, we'll break into small groups and just reminding people, both of the folks online on Zoom and the people in the room, that there's a commitment to stay for the small groups. But you can always pass, but we want people to participate. It's really a valuable part of the course. So just wanted to say that. And also, we won't come back at the end after the small groups will just end. So I just want to announce this coming Saturday, I'll be leading a workshop with Madhuri Shores and Jen Racho on the Buddhist teachings on spiritual friendship. And a lot of you took the fall course on cultivating wholesome relationships, so it might be of interest to you, or if not, if you didn't take the course, you're still willing or, of course, invited to take this workshop coming Saturday, 9:30 to 4. So, impermanence, have you noticed it? You know, as you're maybe sensing in your practice, the problem, if you want to call it a problem, is that we've been trained to see permanence. We're kind of spinning out over and over ideas of permanence. Like even the thought, for those of you in the room, I'm at common ground. It's Monday night and I'm at common ground. Or those of you at home, you know, it's Monday night and I'm here on Zoom, participating in the class. But whatever the story we tell ourselves, it has a little bit of that oomph of permanence, like, oh yeah, that's the truth. We want to notice, we want to admit and get better at noticing that our mind, this mind, it really likes permanence. It depends on it. Like when we say something like, oh yeah, I'm making sense of this part of my life, what we're really doing is kind of creating some permanence over here. I'm the person who doesn't like my job. It may not be a pleasant story, but at least it's a solid story. It involves a me in a permanent sense in a place I have to go to work that I don't like, but it has some oomph, some substance to it. Or this is the world I live in, good world or bad world, depending on your particular point of view at any one moment. And even though we're creating different sort of solid edifices of meaning, it's always changing, but strategically our mind doesn't notice how inconsistent our sense of permanence is. Like and you might bring this up in the small groups, like if you were reflective now about and used your memory, just even today, just clear senses of, oh yeah, I took birth as this kind of person. I put a link in, you won't get it until next Monday, an article by Will Kabat-Zinn, who's a Dharma teacher out in the San Francisco Bay Area. And he has this nice short article about getting off of the BART, the mass transit system in the San Francisco Bay Area, and walking through one neighborhood and noticing, the sense of I'm the one who's afraid being born, right? In that identity, like, oh, I don't know what's going on, and how everything, the body, the way the mind perceives, it's all affected by that reality. And then as he continues walking into a more familiar neighborhood where he lives, then he takes birth as somebody who's comfortable in that space. It's like a different person, different reality. And it's happening all the time. And then he gives another example of being up at night with his young child, and, the tender, loving person takes birth, and then the angry parent who wants their sleep and doesn't want to be vomited on and, takes birth. And so how many of those births and deaths did we have today? How many different moments of rage or moments of boredom or moments of delight, moments of happiness? All the way up to now, oh, I'm the Dharma person now, or whatever this identity is. And part of what we're learning to do is just get familiar with that conditioned habit to need something that appears permanent or solid or substantive. Because it will appear that I can depend on it, like the idea that we have. I can depend on that. Got it down. It's as if we've been secretly, mostly unconsciously, at war with impermanence. Just this. Once the mind is seduced and identified with a separate sense of self, we call it in Buddhism self-view, then it's sort of stuck, having to, in a fluid, unfolding reality, having to keep constructing something that will feel solid and dependable over and over again. And you probably have heard, the word dukkha itself is related to an axle or a wheel that's out of true. It doesn't really work very well because it's clunky. And this is the thing, it's like we're trying to live in this substantive way as if things are things in a world that is fluid and unfixed and in flux. And that there's a dissonance there. There's an uneasiness. So we have little, training phrases that we use. I think I read last week from Suzuki Roshi, a Zen teacher, composure with impermanence. Or Venerable Analio, this German monk, says, keep calmly knowing change, non-contention with change. Anything can happen anytime. That was one of the things. I mean, this is like a reminder. Or no surprises. Just imagine walking into your home, no surprises, or leaving your home, no surprises, or going to work, no surprises. This doesn't mean there won't be strange or unpredictable things, but because we know that anything can happen anytime, and because we're practicing not being dependent on what we think is going to happen, we will still think about what's going to happen. I mean, the mind projects all kinds of things. The problem is the clinging or the need of certainty or the projection of permanence. So there's nothing wrong with, wondering if it's ever going to warm up. Oh yeah, it's probably going to warm up. But to know that we don't know, like how that's going to unfold. This is from Gil Franstow. This article is linked to in the email. Change is a central feature of life. It can be exhilarating, frightening, exhausting, or relieving. It can spark sadness or happiness, resistance or grasping. Insight into impermanence is central to Buddhist practice. Buddhist practice points us toward becoming equanimous in the midst of change and wiser in how we respond to what comes and goes. In fact, Buddhism could be seen as one extended meditation on transience as a means to freedom. The Buddha's last words were, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence. Be awake. All things come and go. And when Gil says like one extended meditation on transience, it's really one extended meditation on the way it is. But the relevant characteristic, and it's always been this way for us in our lives, it is that way now and it will be that way. So when we say, we're opening to the present moment, the relevant aspect of the present moment is this unfolding, changing nature. It's not a particular temperature I'm feeling or the particular throbbing in my knee or the visual experience. I mean, that's also happening. But what is more relevant than all of those elemental specific characteristics is the changing nature of the present moment. Because that, what we call anicca, this changing, insubstantial, not dependable nature of this unfolding, it's basically telling us how to live, how to relate. Like we would never grasp it if we understood it to be what it is. We get clingy, we get greedy because there's a sense that there's somebody who can own something, have something in a meaningful way. I noticed my mind, this is sort of funny, maybe some of you will relate, some of you more my age, but as I get older and work hard at saving for retirement, I noticed the thought like, God, I'll feel disappointed if I die before I get to spend the money I've saved for retirement. I mean, it's just sort of this funny thing, it's like just planning, how that idea of me in retirement as if it's a thing there. But what it really is who knows? And it doesn't mean you shouldn't plan, but it's about the honesty of we don't know how it's going to unfold. We don't even know, we're not even that clear about what's unfolding here. Like, how's your heart doing? Say, oh, yeah, that's right, I have a heart that feels. Let's, or how does it feel to be in the group? How's the back? How's the spine? So it's like we're just building these castles, but we're really not even that connected with what this is. So entranced by our thoughts about things. So the practice, we're not trying to get, like master the world of impermanence, transcend it, teach it a lesson. We're trying to live with reality. We're trying to integrate and accept and harmonize with the world as it is. But it takes some practice, right, to cultivate a subtle, stable presence, so we even know like how to show up, how to be who we are. One of the things you can bring up in the small groups, another thing that might be interesting is just how at times in your life change has become a bit of a boogeyman, like really scares you. The possibility, like the not knowing what's going to happen. And just the strong demand to want to figure something out or to want to get a straight answer. What's going to happen to me? Am I sick? How sick am I? Is this cancer going to come back? And if we had already integrated this understanding of anicca, the attitude of, well, who knows? Who knows? Who knows how this will unfold? I do know it's unfolding, but I don't know how it's going to unfold. Because by nature, things are uncertain, ungovernable, not dependable. I mean, this is why we're so transfixed with things like the fires in Los Angeles, especially the personal stories. Because it's like this, we can't really believe it, like anything can happen anytime. Or when we hear about somebody getting sick, or when somebody dies when they shouldn't have died, they were young, how could they die? This is from Thich Nhat Hanh. We think impermanence makes us suffer. It is not impermanence that makes us suffer. What makes us suffer is wanting things to be permanent when they are not. So I mentioned this earlier, but that can be a bit of a training too. And again, it could be something you bring up in the small group tonight about times in your life where you really lived and you weren't surprised by the truth of anything can happen anytime. You know, and it feels a little liberating, like when something out of the box happens and you just observe your mind and body sort of showing up and doing what needs to be done. Have you had that experience? Where something out of the box happens, I mean, in a sense, out of the box, but the mind doesn't have a problem with that. And it can inspire us, like, oh, this is a good way to live. You know, where you just do what needs to be done without expecting anything in particular to be happening. But whatever is going to happen will happen, and the heart just responds and responds and responds depending on what's happening. It's like, what are you going to be doing in a year? And it's not like we wouldn't be able to answer that question. We could speculate in that moment with the person we're with, you know, give an appropriate response. But the real response is, well, that will be interesting to see what happens in a year. It will be interesting. I know things will keep unfolding. And I know that, like, what will happen in a year, that's not an end point, right? If something is ending, there's going to be a beginning. And so it's not really an ending. And if there's a beginning, there's going to be an ending, right? It's just, that's part of the truth of this. It's really a process, a never-ending process. We have this sense how impermanence can ruin our nice experiences, you know, a vacation or a nice dinner with a friend. I remember vacations as a kid. We used to go see my uncle in Montana. It's the place my dad grew up, the ranch or the farm my dad grew up in eastern Montana. And one of my dad's brothers took it over after my grandfather died. And we just loved being out there. And at the time, he was a bachelor, so he was just a lot of fun for our family to go out. And it was so hard to leave. I just remember crying, like, oh, this is ending, gotta go home. And it's just sort of interesting, this experience of loss. I had a conversation with one of our teachers recently, and they're going through a divorce, or maybe just went through a divorce and got a new place. And just that, it was really nice to see this attitude of both being really honest with the pain and disorientation, but also like really, I don't know if excited is a word, but open and felt sense of newness. And you know, and this is kind of somebody older, not really that young, but just like a new birth, and the kind of energy that can be there. So it's not about, you know, the practice isn't somehow being inhuman, where we're not moved by loss and endings, or we're not moved by new beginnings. It's all of that. But in the loss, there's an understanding that it isn't over. You know, even with death, just because we don't know what happens next doesn't mean it doesn't keep unfolding, whatever that unfolding might be. I mean, where in nature is a real ending? This is again from Gil Fronsdal. The Buddha approached suffering differently. he said that suffering is not inherent in the world of impermanence. Suffering arises when we cling. When clinging disappears, impermanence no longer gives rise to suffering. The solution to suffering then is to end clinging, not to try to escape from the transient world. It is possible to find ease and grace in the world of change. It is possible to trust the mind of non-clinging, and so find our liberation within the world of impermanence. One means of reducing clinging is to see the transient nature of what we cling to. That whatever this is, it isn't worthy of grasping. And he writes, this insight can either show us the futility of trying to find lasting happiness in what is impermanent, or it can encourage us to examine deeply why we cling. The ordinary understanding of impermanence is accessible to us, to all. We see old age, sickness, and death. We notice that things change. The seasons change, society changes, our emotions change, and the weather changes. When I lived in Tennessee, they had a saying, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. Sometimes realizing that an experience is impermanent, we can relax with how it is, including its coming and going. Other times, seeing that change is inevitable helps us to let go of clinging to how things are, or resistance to change. And sometimes recognizing that we are all equal in being subject to aging, sickness, and death is the basis for compassion. There's an old teaching story some of you might have heard before, but it's just about embodying more of that unfixed way of being in the world of change. And there's a farmer, and one of his horses escapes, and he really relied on that horse to do the farming. And all the neighbors go, oh, that's too bad. And the farmer said, well, maybe. And then a few days later, that horse came back, and several wild horses came with it. So all of a sudden, the farmer had 5 horses instead of 1. And all the neighbors go, oh, you were so lucky. And the farmer, who had some wisdom, said, well, maybe. And then a couple of days later, one of his sons was going to domesticate the wild horses and so they could be ridden. And one of the wild horses threw him off, and he broke a leg. And all the neighbors are going, oh, you need your son to help you farm. What are you going to do? It's too bad. And the wise farmer goes, who knows? Maybe. We'll see. And then a few days later, the general comes into town with the army, taking all the young men to war, but not his son, who has a broken leg. And all the neighbors are going, oh, you're so lucky. And I goes, oh, who knows? Maybe. Right? And on like that. Yeah, it's just instructive about where what's our refuge? Is our refuge some story that we're able to tell ourselves about our life? Okay, I think I got enough money to retire, or I think I got to plan what I'm going to do with this difficult relationship in my life. Or whatever it is, it's like, is that our refuge, that we've got things figured out? Because it doesn't take too much like standing back a little to realize, oh, there's a lot of uncertainty. Like, how much do I need in the bank to cover every single contingency? And then if everything falls apart, cash isn't going to be good. So maybe I need, Well, yeah, but will I be able to sell gold coins? No, probably not. If things really fall apart, what I need are things I can barter. So it would be, I'll buy 1,000 Swiss Army knives. They'll be so valuable if it all falls apart. It just kind of, when we're looking for permanence, we'll see that anxiety. And that anxiety, the dukkha, is precisely because we're looking for a refuge that doesn't exist and isn't even needed. It's not just that the refuge doesn't exist. It isn't even needed in the way we think it's needed. We think we need a refuge that manifests permanence because we think there's a somebody that's dependent on permanence, me. There's just so much delusion, that we don't even know what a true refuge is. So the Buddha's basic practice is, just to explore little by little until you gain confidence. Why don't you just relax with awareness? And you might get clear about what is a refuge and what isn't a refuge. Don't presume you know enough to know what a refuge is. Because, just look at our culture. Most people think the refuge is, being beautiful, having a lot of money, or some version of that. Is that really a refuge for anybody? So what is the refuge? One of the things you can talk about in this small group, which will start in 5 or 10 minutes, is even just over the last week or month, just like I mentioned earlier in the talk, just talk about these realities you get absorbed into and how that affects your values. And then that will fall apart, and then will be another drama or another sort of vortex of meaning that the mind inhabits for a while, and then that falls apart. And how we can it's really valuable to talk about it because it begins to normalize that pattern so that we actually can observe it even when we're in the middle of it. Like that article that you can read next week from Will Kabat-Zinn, that when he was describing being up at night with his child for the 4th time, I think he said, and really wanting to move because he was uncomfortable, but didn't want to wake the baby up, because then it'd be a whole another process. And but in that setting, just seeing, he just relayed how many different realities came and went in his mind. This is one of the things about, if you haven't been on a longer retreat, like a 9-day retreat or a long weekend retreat, when we don't have our cell phones and there's just a lot of the things that we get absorbed into we don't have access to, we don't have media, we're not talking with each other. So there's just a lot of more reflective time, and we just see one thing after another. And the mind eventually starts to get bored, but for a long, long time, it's not bored. It's in that vortex, and then at some point it gets exhausted, but before it even realizes it, it's jumped to another drama. And the next drama might be how stupid I was to be lost in that drama, but it's still a drama. And the mind exists in it, caught in it. So Andy Olensky, a scholar and teacher, I mentioned about the process nature of things. He says process thinking is so process thinking that so characterizes Buddhism. People and things do not exist as much as they become. And this more dynamic form of the verb to be is usually preferred in the literature, this becoming. Fundamental, this is Andy Olensky again, fundamental to the Buddhist notion of ignorance and delusion is not that we are inherently flawed in our nature. It is just that we make some serious errors on many levels, as we attempt to make sense of the world around us. As we come to recognize through meditation practice some of the ways we misconstrue things about our experience, we become more able to correct for those errors and gain greater clarity. This is the Buddhist view of mental disease and mental health. Delusion is a mental illness that causes all sorts of suffering. Mental health can be restored by correcting the flaws in how the mind operates. Fortunately, Buddhas arise to make things bright, right? The teachings of the Buddha, and illustrate in detail how this recovery of our natural health can be accomplished. So that's a nice way to think about it, that we're sick, and the sickness are our habits of how we perceive. And we perceive by projecting, coloring our experience in terms of permanence, substance. And it's not just how we perceive, but then it's how we think, and eventually it gets ossified as our view. Like we just see that, and it becomes unquestioned. And so even when there's obvious data around change, that things are fluid, that everything's a process unfolding, it doesn't break through the delusion. We have so much momentum, or delusion has so much momentum, we're kind of immune from reality breaking through. Until sometimes, we get shocked by something happening, something big rocks our world, and not always, but sometimes it's enough to, question like, oh, I was so sure this was a solid thing. Like when people get sick and they didn't expect to get sick, or a relationship falls apart that wasn't expected to fall apart. How can this be? What else do I not know? And our experience, when we get sensitive and get some continuity of mindful awareness, the present moment is so alive with experiencing things being known, coming and going with such rapidity, that we really get a sense of how just our ordinary way of functioning, where the mind is very quickly distilling something that's so amazingly complex and alive with change, into, I'm in my kitchen seeing what's in the fridge. It's just that reduction from, and when we have kind of a ordinary experience of how alive and unfixed everything is, we almost think of it as a mystical experience because it's so unusual. We're so in our head, or as we say, or in our thoughts about things, we don't realize how, I think amazing is an appropriate word, how amazing things are all the time. And it doesn't need to be a special sunset, or being on the beach. It's like this moment, too. So for the small groups tonight, I had a sheet with some thoughts about that. Go. Yeah, so just, I think the way to see what comes up for you is just your own experience of change and the fluidity, the uncertainty of life. And just, if you can, just as best as you can remember, like what have been your mind's strategies, like just denying the truth of change, or trying to get on top of it, to manage it, to control it, to nail it down. Like, is that your personality's approach to dealing with change when you want something permanent? And have you noticed the rope burn, where things change even if we don't want them to change? Things are unfolding even when we don't want them to unfold. And how about experiences where you felt like you weren't resisting change in your life? And like you're falling in love, or you're in a relationship, and you appreciate to some degree how fluid and unfixed this thing is, and it could change in any particular way, but you relax with that, and maybe even feel alive by how unknown it is, even as you're living it. So just examples of not fighting impermanence, not resisting it, not denying it. Maybe just little moments here and there. What was that like? And it's also okay to respond to things you read or studied, doubts you have. Basically anything goes. And the ways these small groups will work is you introduce yourself, say your name, share your pronouns, decide what order you're going to go in. Then everyone will get 2 to 3 minutes. Somebody should keep time for the group. And during that 2 to 3 minutes, it's really your time. It's okay to pause, and the people, 2 or 3 people who are listening, they're going to help you hold that silent space. Just be reflective, see if there's anything else you want to say. After 2 or so minutes, then go to the next person. Each person has their time, and then there's usually about 5 to 7 minutes just for open conversation at the end. And we'll end at 9 o'clock, and Maggie will do the people who are online, divide you into small groups, and I'll count you out here, and we'll just end. The people online, Maggie will let you know when it's 9 o'clock. We'll call you back, and you can just say goodbye to the people on Zoom. And here, once you're small groups, once you hear the bell, you can just say goodnight to each other and then head home. You don't have to come back together in the large group. Good. Any questions about that? Good. And so I'll say goodnight, and I'll see you in a week. But let me count you out for those of you in the room.